Today's Amud in Masechet Megillah is Gimel Amud Bet. We're starting at Amar Rava on Gimel Amud Bet. It's about 8 or 10 lines down from the top of the page. Amar Rava.
Yeah.
Amar Rava. You see it, Heli? Gimel Amud Bet. Amar Rava. Yosef, yeshcha?
I will get it.
Amar Rava.
Eventually, yeah.
Gotta be here somewhere.
That's Rabbi Hananiah. Okay,
okay. Yeah. Now you see a little higher.
I get it.
A little higher.
Get it.
A little higher. A little higher.
The end of the line.
Amar Rava. I have the first one line is Talmud Torah di Yachid Kal. Okay, so we have is like this. Yesterday we finished off with discussion regarding how Mikra Megillah is so important that you could even push off Talmud Torah, you could even push off Avodah, you're even allowed to, you're in Ta'anit, that's why. You're in the wrong Masechta. Now I'm going to find it there. So, that's what we finished off with yesterday, regarding the importance of Talmud Torah, of Mikra Megillah, that it even overrides Talmud Torah and Avodah. So we're going to have two sections in today's Amud, which is, firstly, we'll discuss and contrast the importance of different things regarding, also associated with Mikra Megillah. Rava's going to tell us that. And the second section we'll deal with is different types of cities and create distinctions between them for different areas of halacha. So Amar Rav, really it'll be Meimers of Rabbi Shifman Levi, we'll see. So Amar Rav, Rava says like this, Pshita li, it's obvious to me, Avodah Mikra Megillah. If a person on Purim, he's faced with two options. Either I engage in Avodah, which for us means Tefillah, or Korbanot back in the day, or Mikra Megillah, or I could read the Megillah. So that we know Mikra Megillah Adif, Mid Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. We know that it's Pshita, says Rava, that Mikra Megillah is more important based on Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. Yesterday, Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina learned from the Pasuk Mishpacha Mishpacha that even the families who were involved in Avodah, the Kohanim, the Leviim, the Israelim that were engaged in Avodah in the Beit HaMikdash, they stop their Avodah and they go to hear Mikra Megillah. So we see clearly Mikra Megillah is more important than Avodah. Fine. Talmud Torah Mikra Megillah. Now, we also know...
You know, it's very obvious. I mean, Megillah, you just here, then you could go do whatever you got to do. I mean, it's not like either this or that, you know?
Ah, okay, so you're saying you're saying a very important point. The Rishonim talk about this. You're not really going to lose the Avodah. That's what you're saying.
Do it after.
It's true. But even so, to say that it takes precedence is a huge chidush.
Especially if
it's rabbinic, it's the Rabbanan, and we're saying it overrides Avodah. It's a big chidush we just said. Okay. Talmud Torah Mikra Megillah. What we said, it's from Psukim, fine, in Megillat Esther. Talmud Torah Mikra Megillah. Now, if you have the opportunity to learn Torah or hear the Megillah again, Mikra Megillah Adif, Mikra Megillah is also more important. Why? Midasamchu shel Beit Rebbe. We had yesterday, Rebbe used to stop his whole yeshiva from learning and they would go hear Mikra Megillah. So we see clearly it overrides. What about, now we get to a very interesting variable. Talmud Torah Meit Mitzvah. Meit Mitzvah is a scenario, a person's walking and he finds a dead Jew, and there's no one there to bury him. There's no relatives, no one's taking care of him. So it's a big mitzvah. You take care of Meit Mitzvah. It's a big mitzvah. So what if you have the opportunity to learn Torah or take care of a Meit Mitzvah? So over here he says also, Pshita, Meit Mitzvah Adif. It's obvious Meit Mitzvah is more important. Midetanya, and there's a Braita that supports this. It says, Mivatlin Talmud Torah lo tza'at hamet, that we stop learning Torah to accompany a dead person going to be buried, ulachnasat kala, interesting, as well as to accompany a kala to the chuppah. These are so important. These things, you stop learning Torah. So Meit Mitzvah would be more important than learning Torah. Now, Avodah u Meit Mitzvah. Now what about if you have Avodah? So either you could do Avodah or Meit Mitzvah. Again, Meit Mitzvah Adif. Meit Mitzvah is more important. Now this is a drasha based on a pasuk in Parashat Naso. In Naso, the parsha there talks about a Nazir. Now, a Nazir is somebody we know who accepts 3 special restrictions on himself, and he has to keep them for a minimum 30 days, and then he shaves off his hair. We know the whole story. In the context of Nazir, we know what's one of the main things he's not allowed to do. He's not allowed to become Tameh Met, which means he's not allowed to touch a dead body or other similar types of Tum'ah. Fine. The pasuk says you can't become tamei to anyone about a Nazir, and then it specifically lists his father, his mother, his sister, his brother, and his sister. He cannot become tamei to them. So each of those are extra, because once you say you can't become tamei to anyone, you can't become tamei to them as well. That's obvious. So the Gemara elsewhere, which we're not going to go through today, goes through why it says each of those. It teaches us drashot, each one. The fourth one is la'achoto, and this is the drasha we're about to show. What is mila'achoto? Ula'achoto. What does that teach us? His sister. The Tanya, the Braita, explains as follows. Ula'achoto ma Talmud lomar. Why does it have to say he cannot become tamei to his sister? We have a person, not a Nazir, a regular person, was going to slaughter his korban pesach. So this is avodah. V'lamulet bino, or to give his son a brit milah. And he heard that his relative passed away. His sister passed away. You'd think maybe he should become tamei to the relative, because there's an inyan to become tamei, to engage in burying the immediate relative. So Amart, the answer is lo yitameh. By a Nazir it says you're not allowed to become tamei to those immediate relatives, and certainly, the answer is you're not allowed to become tamei. In terms of the avodah that you're doing, it overrides that tumah to the immediate relative. Rashi explains, just as a Nazir will not engage in that type of tum'ah, but rather he'll continue his nizirut, so too in this scenario, if you're engaged in avodah, you're not going to become tamei to an immediate relative. That's the point. Yachol, it might be kishem she'eno mitameh la'achoto, that just as you're not tamei to your sister, kach eno mitameh l'meit mitzvah. But what if you're going to do korban pesach and you chance upon a meit mitzvah? So you might think it's the same thing. You disregard the meit mitzvah and you continue doing korban pesach. Talmud lomar ula'achoto. That's the drasha of ula'achoto. It's a diuk. La'achoto de'eno mitameh. You're not allowed to become tamei to your sister, to the relative, when you're engaged in korban pesach. Aval mitameh l'meit mitzvah, but you could become tamei, you have to become tamei, to a meit mitzvah. So this is the source then, that meit mitzvah versus avodah, meit mitzvah is more significant. Beautiful. So until now, Rava set us up for this question. What we've shown is, Mikra Megillah trumps avodah and Talmud Torah. We've shown that meit mitzvah trumps avodah and Talmud Torah. So obviously, what's the next question? What if you have Mikra Megillah and meit mitzvah? Which one has precedence? Which one's more significant? Because they both seem to be on the highest point. Level. So Rava asked the following question. Mikra Megillah or meit mitzvah? Okay? He was traveling to shul to hear the Megillah in the morning on Purim, and lo aleinu, he found a dead body. He needs to engage in burying. Should he go engage in burying it, or should he go to shul and hear Megillah? What should he do? Which one is more significant? Now there's logic on both sides. Do we say Mikra Megillah adif, that it's more significant to engage in reading Megillah mishum persume nisa? When we read Megillah, we spread the miracle of the wonders, what Hashem did for us, meaning we remember how Hashem saved us in the times of Shushan. That's a tremendous thing. Odilmor, perhaps meit mitzvah adif. Maybe meit mitzvah is more significant, mishum kavod abriot, because of kavod, of honor for people. Very interesting thing. We in Judaism, we value kavod abriot in the classical sense. It means we give honor to people, live people. But even when it comes to dead bodies, we have to treat the body with tremendous respect. There's many halachot about this, where you're not allowed to just disregard the body. You need someone to stay there and stand there. There's a lot of halachot associated, because we give great honor to the deceased also. So both of them have logic. Which one is more important? So the Gemara answers, Batar de Ba'aya Adar Pashta. After Rav asked the question, he resolved it, and he said, Meit mitzvah adif, that the care for the dead body that no one else is taking care of overrides Mikra Megillah's importance. Why? Where do we see such a source? The Amar Mar, like Mar says, Gadol kavod abriot, great is kavod abriot, shedochet lo ta'aseh shebat Torah. Because we know kavod abriot, the importance of personal dignity, or dignity for people, overrides even a lo ta'aseh in the Torah. Even a negative command, the isur in the Torah, can be overridden because of kavod abriot. Now, where do we find this reality? So Rashi speaks it out. We know that when there's a mitzvah, vashavat aveda, move this a little bit. If a person is walking and he sees a lost object of another person, he picks it up and returns it. Mitzvah vashavat aveda. The Torah teaches us that there are scenarios where And it's asur, by the way. You're not allowed to avoid returning it. If you avert your eyes and you don't return it, it's asur. You're doing an asur. But there are examples, and the examples the Gemara gives elsewhere is zaken ve'eno lefi chvodo, which means if you have an old person and he sees a chefet, some sort of an item that's lost, for him to go and pick it up and schlep it around town would not be befitting of his own honor. It would be a lacking of kavod abriot, of his own dignity. He can disregard and walk on. So we see kavod abriot overrides even a lotas in the Torah to avoid returning something that was lost. So therefore, says the Gemara, if the idea of made mitzvah is kavod abriot, certainly if it overrides lotas, it'll also override a rabbinic enactment of Mikra Megilla. Good. Gufa, let's continue. Now, the Gemara continues on by quoting the statement of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi we had before. Guf, Amar Yeshua ben Levi, Krach v'kol samuch lo v'kol nir'ei imo nidon ki krach. We said earlier, we learned from Medina v'ir v'ir, that when you have a walled city, it's not only the people living in the walled city that read Megillah on the 15th, but also we said included in that is kol samuch lo and nir'ei imo. Anybody that is near the walled city is part of the walled city, as well as anybody that's visible from the walled city. So Tana the Braita explains, Samuch afal pi she'eino nir'eh. If, as long as it's close, even if it's not visible from the walled city, it's like the walled city, and also the other way, nir'eh afal pi she'eino samuch. As long as it's visible from the walled city, even if it's not near the walled city, also you read on the 15th. It's like a mukefet choma. So the Gemara wants to know, what is the scenario that it's close and not visible, or visible and not close? Practically, what is the scenario? So we could probably figure this out by thinking about it. But bishlama nireh afal pi she'eino samuch. I understand the scenario of nireh, where it's visible from the walled city, even though it's not nearby. What's the case? Mishkachat la kegon diatva berosh hahar. The walled city is is a low-lying area. There's an outskirt that's on top of a mountain. So now, from the vantage point of the walled city, you could look up and see the outskirts, but it could be very far away. Based on its location, it might be it's not samuch, but it is nir'eh, you could see it. Ela samuch afal pi she'eino nir'eh. But what is the scenario where it's close, but it's not visible? Heichi mishkachat la, Rabbi Yirmiyah she'yoshevet benachal. The opposite case, that the walled city is on top of a mountain, there's some sort of a slope going down off the mountain, below there's an outskirt. So now, it might be a mile away, it might be very close, but you can't see it because of the way that the mountain is set up. This is considered samuch afal pi she'eino nir'eh. Beautiful. Let's continue. Now we quoted Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, so we're going to go through a series of memras of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. The first few talk about different types of cities. Now this first one, the way Rashi learns, is actually a different area of halakha altogether. In this, we're going to distinguish between cities about sales. We know in Eretz Yisrael, this is how Rashi learns. Tosafot disagrees, but Rashi says, in Eretz Yisrael we know, if you own property, it's different than owning property in any other country. Because there's different laws that govern property ownership in Israel over other countries. So for example, if I sell my property in Eretz Yisrael, there's a difference if it's a property that's batei arei choma, a house that was in a walled city, or if it was a house that's a chatzerot, a house that was in a unwalled city. There's differences. So the first drasha is regarding to that halacha. Let's see. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Krach sheyashav ulebesof hukaf. If you have a city as follows. First, the houses were built, and then the wall was created around the houses. So usually you think about a walled city. How did a walled city come to be? So we're going to see from this, in order to constitute batei arei choma in terms of sales, a house in a walled city, it has to be that the wall was first created, and then the houses were built inside. But if yashav ulebesof hukaf, it was first settled, and then the walls were created around it, nidon kikfar. It's treated like a village, meaning it's treated like batei chatzerot. This is how Rashi learns. It's treated like a house in an unwalled city in terms of sales. Where do we find this halacha? Where's the source for this? My time, what's the reason? Because the pasuk tells us in Bahar, when it talks about selling a house in a walled city, it says ve'ish ki yimkor beit moshav ir choma. It says a man who sells beit moshav, a house that was settled ir choma, in a walled city. Means the house was settled in a walled city, which means what was first? The walled city. The wall was before. Sheukaf ulebesof yashav. First it was walled and then it was settled. Beloshi yashav ulebesof ukaf. But otherwise, if it was first settled houses were built and then the city wall was put up, that's not considered a walled city in terms of sales. Now, this goes back to Megillah. Let's see. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Krach she'en bo asara batlanin. If you have a city that does not have 10 batlanin. Now, we're going to use this word krach, even though until now we've used it in the context of a walled city. Here it becomes a little looser. So, a city that does not have 10 batlanin, we're going to speak more about this on Hey Amud Aleph. In order to constitute a large city, that you read Megillah on the 14th, and you don't have a kula to read earlier, like a kfar, like a village, you have to have 10 batlanin. What is a batlanin? What are these people? They're 10 people. Batel. What is batel?
Learning Torah.
So batel literally means they cease. They stop. They don't engage in melacha. So what does it mean? It means they're not working. Rather, they're supported by the city to be there for minyanim all the time. So there's always 10 people there for minyan in the shul. This is kind of where the idea of kolel comes from, but really we're going to see it's focusing specifically on minyan. That's really where it seems to come from. So, a city that does not have these 10 batlanin, nidon kikfar, it's treated like a village, meaning it's considered not like a big city that you have to read on the 14th, but you'd have the leniency to read earlier. My Kamash Malan. So the Gemara says, what's the chidush? Tanina, the Mishnah coming up on Hey Amud Aleph is going to tell us, Ezui ir gdola, what is an ir gdola? Kol sheyesh b'asara batlanin. If it has 10 batlanin. Pachot mikana re'ezek kfar, less than that it's a village. So what's the chidush? The Gemara answers the chidush is krach itzterich alei. Krach is a metropolis in this context. It's a metropolis, and that's a chidush. A metropolis is a market town. It's a town where many people from all over come to buy wares. So as Rashi explains, even though there's always going to be 10 people that are not currently engaged in work in that city, but they're not 10 people that are paid and dedicated by the city to engage in making the minyanim. Those you can't rely on to create asara batlanin. So even though there's constantly a flow of people in the city that perhaps could fit the bill, they're not engaged in work because they only work in their hometowns. That's not treated like asara batlanin. You need 10 of the towns. Even though they gather from outside, that's not enough. Let's move on to this. The next meme, Rav Amar Yeshua ben Levi. Now this is a vague meme. We're going to have to clarify. Krach shecharav ulebesof yashav. If you have a city that was destroyed and then settled, nidon kikrach. It's again treated like a city. So first the Gemara assumes we mean a walled city that lost its wall and then it was rebuilt. It's treated like a walled city. But that can't be, as we'll see. My charav, what does it mean it was destroyed? Ile macharvo chomotav. If it means that its walls were destroyed, yashav in lo yashav lo, that would imply that if it was rebuilt, the walls were rebuilt, it is considered a walled city. But if not, it wouldn't be. But we know that that's not true. Because Vatanya, we're going to learn later, Rabbi Eliezer bar Yossi Omer, Eliezer bar Yossi says, Asher lo choma. We deduce from the pasuk, it says lo. Now lo is with a vav and it's with an aleph. It could mean it has or it doesn't have. So what do we deduce from it? Even if it does not have a wall now, but it had a wall in the days of Yoshua ben Nun, that's treated like a walled city. It doesn't have to have a wall today, so that can't be the pshat in Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rather, what does it mean? It means if you have a big city and it had 10 batlanin, so now it's like a big city, it's not a village, but then it lost them. Right? The koil ran out of money. It happens. So then they lost them. So the halacha is, now that it doesn't have them, it's like a kfar. But if it gets 10 batlanin again, it goes back to being like a big city. So Tosafot learns, what's the chidush? The chidush is, you don't have to worry, maybe it'll lose them again. Meaning you might say, look, there's a track record here. We should just treat this place like a kfar, like a village. Kamash Malan, if it has those 10 people, it's treated like a big city. You don't have to treat it like a village. Let's do one more memra before we finish here. Elamai charav shecharab me'asara batlanin. B'amar Yeshua ben Levi. Moving to Dalet up to Aleph now. Lud ve'ono ve'geach harashim mukafot choma mi'emot Yoshua ben Nun. Havu. These three towns or cities, which Rashi learns, are in the province of Shevet Binyamin. It's in the Nachalav Binyamin. Lud, Ono, and Geach Harashim. These were walled cities from the days of Yoshua ben Nun. We're going to see the chidush really is that the walls look very new. So if somebody was walking by, they might say, this must have been walled recently. And therefore it's not really walled from Yoshua ben Nun's days. So the chidush that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is saying is, no, this wall actually predates. It's it's much earlier, meaning during the days of Yoshua ben Nun, exactly. So the Gemara says, well, wait a second. Bahani Yoshua banani, did Yoshua build these cities? You have another person later, after Yeshua ben Nun, named El-Poel, and he built them. Dichtiv in Divrei Yamim it says, Ubnei El-Poel, Ever u'Misham v'Shamed. It says the sons of El-Poel were Eber, Misham, and Shamed. Hu bana et Onov et Lod u'Bnotea. And he built these cities, and we just referenced them. And this is after the days of Yeshua ben Nun. So it seems like these cities were not built up in the days of Yeshua ben Nun. They were built up later. So the Gemara responds to that, a question with a question. But the way you're saying it, Asa banani, really was Asa. Asa, who was one of the kings of Yehuda, if I remember correctly. He really built it, and he was even later. Dichtiv, like the Pasuk tells us in Divrei Yamim, Vayiven, the Girsat's changed here, the Misarat Hashas says, Arei Mitzura b'Yehuda, he built fortified cities in Yehuda. And it discusses as one of those cities, these cities of Binyamin. So it seems like Asa was the one to build them up. So was it Yeshua, was it El-Poel, or was it Asa? Seems to be a contradiction. So RYbL Lazar, Hani mukafot choma mi'emot Yeshua ben Nun hava. What happened was like this. Really, these cities were built up in the days of Yeshua ben Nun. They had walls then, and that's why they're walled cities. Charuv b'mei pilegesh b'giv'ah. We know that there was a terrible incident in the end of Shoftim, the Sefer Shoftim, called Pilegesh B'Giv'ah, and many of the people of Binyamin were killed out. It was a black mark on the Jewish people's history. So in those days, these cities were destroyed because of that war. V'ata El-Poel banani. El-Poel rebuilt them. Hadar in Pol, they started to fall, means those walls started to break down. So Ata Asa Shaptzinu. Then Asa, the king, I believe, of Yehuda, came and he refortified those walls. So that's why, by the way, they look new. Because really, they were refortified later in history, so that's why they might look new, even though they were really had been existing from the days of Yeshua ben Nun. Dekanami, and the Gemara says you can prove this. Because in Divrei Yamim it says, he said to Yehuda, Nivne tarim ha'ele. He said, let's build these cities, meaning these were cities that already existed, that they were rebuilding. This implies darim havu meikarash mamina, that these already existed before, and he was just rebuilding them. This is an accepted proof. We'll stop here. We'll pick up, continuing from Yeshua ben Levi's Memras tomorrow with Daled Amud Aleph. Wonderful.